Okay, so, you know those Nigerian prince emails everyone loves to joke about? The ones promising a fortune if you just help them out with a small transfer. You're probably thinking, yeah, those are so obviously fake. And you're right to be skeptical. But here's where it gets interesting. The story behind these scams is way deeper than you might think. We're talking centuries old tricks, global networks, even a dash of the supernatural. So buckle up, because this deep dive into Nigerian scams is about to get wild. We're going to uncover the surprisingly long history behind these schemes, trace their evolution, and unpack why they've become so infamous. By the end of this, you'll be armed with the knowledge to not only spot a scam a mile away, but also understand the forces that drive them. Now, to help us unravel this fascinating, albeit shady world, I've got our expert guide with us. So these Nigerian prince emails they just a modern twist on an old con.
You hit the nail on the head. What's fascinating here is that while we associate these scams with Nigeria today, they tap into a universal human weakness that's been exploited for centuries. The desire for easy money.
Greed, in other words.
Exactly. And one of the earliest documented versions of this, a blueprint, if you will, is the Spanish prisoner con. Picture this. It's the late 18th century, and you receive a letter. It tells the tale of a wealthy individual, wrongfully imprisoned in Spain, desperate to escape.
Okay, I'm already hooked. A tale of intrigue and injustice. Who wouldn't want to help?
Precisely. The letter dangles this promise of a huge reward, riches beyond your wildest dreams if you'll just send a small sum to help with their escape. Of course, there is no prisoner, no escape plan, and definitely no reward.
Wait, so this Spanish prisoner thing, is that like the OG Nigerian prince email?
You could say that. The scammers are banking on your greed, maybe even a touch of sympathy, to cloud your judgment. They're masters at crafting a narrative that tugs at your emotions and makes you suspend disbelief.
Wow, that's crazy. So these psychological tricks, they've been working for centuries.
Absolutely. The methods evolve, technology changes, but the core principles, the manipulation of human desires, remain remarkably consistent.
Okay, that makes sense. But how did Nigeria specifically get so tied to these scams? What was going on over there that made this type of fraud explode?
To understand that, we need to rewind the clock a little bit to the 1980s and 90s in Nigeria.
Okay.
The country was grappling with economic hardship, political instability, and widespread unemployment. It was a very difficult time for many Nigerians.
So a perfect storm for scams to take root. When people are desperate, they might be more willing to try anything, even something risky, to improve their situation, right?
Exactly. People were yearning for opportunity, a way out of their circumstances, and unfortunately for some, that way out involved exploiting others' desire for quick riches.
And that's where the infamous 419 comes into play, right? I've heard that term thrown around a lot, but I'll admit I don't actually know what it refers to.
It's not just slang. Actually, 419 refers to a specific section of the Nigerian Criminal Code, Section 419. To be exact, it deals specifically with fraud and attempts to obtain property by false pretenses.
So it's literally part of Nigerian law. That's pretty telling about how big of a problem this became.
Absolutely. It became so widespread that the number itself became synonymous with these scams. Almost like a cultural phenomenon, you could say.
You know, you're right. You see it referenced everywhere. News reports, movies, music, even in comedy. It's almost like it took on a life of its own.
It's a testament to how pervasive these scams became woven into the fabric of Nigerian society during that period. But it's crucial to remember that behind the code, behind the headlines, are real victims who lost their savings, their homes, sometimes even their livelihoods.
That's a sobering thought. It's easy to get caught up in the almost cultural aspect of it, but at the end of the day, these scams have very real consequences for people.
Precisely. And it's important to keep that in mind as we delve further into how these scams went global.
Speaking of going global, that's when the internet enters the picture, right? That must have been a game changer for these scammers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Up until that point, these scams were limited by the speed of postal mail or fax machines. But the internet provided anonymity, global reach, and a low barrier to entry. Suddenly, anyone with a computer and an internet connection could potentially become a scammer.
And that's where we see the rise of the Yahoo boys, right? I always wondered where that term came from.
It's actually quite straightforward. In the early days of internet scams, Yahoo Mail was one of the most popular email providers.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
These scammers, often young and tech-savvy, used Yahoo Mail to connect with potential victims and carry out their schemes. And so the Yahoo boys were born.
So they were using what was then cutting-edge technology
Right.
to dust off this age-old con.
Precisely. And as the internet evolved, so did the scams. They went from those crude Nigerian prince emails to much more sophisticated schemes.
Like what? Like what kind of schemes?
Well, we saw phishing attacks, for example, where scammers create fake websites that look identical to legitimate ones like banks or online stores to steal your login credentials.
Oh yeah, I've seen those before. They can be really convincing.
Exactly. They prey on our trust in familiar brands and our tendency to just click links without really thinking about it too much, especially when we're in a hurry.
It's scary how good they've gotten at mimicking these websites.
And it doesn't stop there. We've also seen a surge in romance scams, which are particularly devastating.
Those are the ones where they create fake profiles on dating sites and try to build relationships with people, ultimately to scam them out of money, right?
Exactly. They prey on people's desire for connection, often targeting those who might be feeling vulnerable or lonely. They'll build trust over time, sharing personal stories, sending gifts, even planning trips together, and then it all culminates in some kind of request for financial assistance.
It's heartbreaking. It's one thing to lose money, but to have your emotions manipulated like that, that's got to be incredibly painful.
It is. Many victims describe it as a profound betrayal of trust, leaving lasting emotional scars.
Wow. And all of this whole evolution of scams, it's tied to how technology has advanced.
Absolutely. Technology has been both a blessing and a curse in this regard. It's made communication easier than ever, but it's also provided scammers with new tools and avenues to exploit.
Okay, so we've covered the history, the evolution, the impact. But there's one more thing I have to ask about. Something that sounds almost too strange to be true. Tell me about Yahoo, Yahoo Plus.
All right, so this is where things take an even more intriguing turn. Yahoo, Yahoo Plus refers to scammers who incorporate rituals, often referred to as juju, into their operations.
Wait, hold on. Are you telling me they use magic to try and scam people?
Well, in a way, yes. They believe that these rituals, which often involve sacrifices or offerings, will enhance their chances of success.
So they're blending traditional beliefs with modern-day crime. That's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
It certainly is. And it speaks to the desperation some of these scammers must feel, believing they need supernatural assistance to guarantee their success.
It makes you wonder, too, about the victims who might be from similar cultural backgrounds. Imagine being scammed and believing that there's this whole other layer of mystical forces at play.
It adds a whole other level of complexity to an already challenging issue and makes it that much harder to combat.
Because how do you argue with someone who believes they have supernatural powers on their side?
Exactly. It highlights the deeply ingrained cultural and psychological factors at play here.
So where do we go from here? We've uncovered this long and winding history of scams, the evolution, the human cost. What's the takeaway for our listeners? What can they do to protect themselves in this increasingly complex world of online deception?
Honestly, the most important thing is awareness. The more you know about these scams, how they operate, and the psychological tactics they employ, the better equipped you'll be to spot them and avoid falling victim.
Knowledge is power. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Be wary of any unsolicited offers that seem too good to be true. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
That's great advice, and I think this whole deep dive has been a great reminder that we can't be too careful online.
Absolutely. And remember, if you do encounter something suspicious, don't be afraid to report it to the authorities.
That's right. We all have a role to play in combating these scams. So stay informed, stay vigilant, and together we can make the online world a little bit safer. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of Nigerian scams. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit eye-opening. Remember, knowledge is your best defense. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.